All right, continuing our study of 1 Kings, chapter 7. We're building Solomon's temple, as you know. We're going to talk about building the palace today. We're going to be talking about the furnishings of the temple and then the dedication of the temple. But here's a trivia question for you. Not so trivial, I don't think. What New Testament event is foreshadowed by the building of Solomon's temple? Dun, 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 dun.
When Jesus went over there to the temple and knocked over the table.
Close. That's a cleansing of the temple. But actually, the building of the temple, what does it foreshadow in the New Testament?
Oh,
Christ's death and resurrection.
Well, no, even before that. The birth of Christ. And why do I say that? What was the purpose of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem?
I can meet with them.
It was the dwelling
Presence.
place. It was a place that God was going to inhabit. And remember, Jesus said, y'all talked about some various things in Jesus' life, and they're all valid. But remember the time that Jesus said, "Destroy this temple,
And I'll
build it back in 3 days." Right. So the temple that he's talking about is really himself, right? Because Jesus really was the temple. God's presence was certainly with him. But never forget also that the temple is a foreshadowing of Christ, the presence of God. But what does the New Testament tell us about ourselves?
We're a vessel.
We're the temple.
We're temples, yeah. Paul said, don't you know that your body, your life is a temple of God? Meaning what?
He lives in us.
That's the place that God really wants to dwell. He wants to inhabit these temples. So when we think about the building of the temple, in fact, when Jackie was reading it to me this morning, I said, why are we spending so much time with all these details? Well, the details, sometimes, there's more information there than perhaps we can digest, but we never want to underemphasize the importance of Solomon's temple, not for what it was, not for the stone and all the gold and the silver and the ornamentation, but for what it represented. It represented the place, the intricate place, the beautiful place where God was going to dwell. And the important thing is that the temple was built in accordance to God's specifications, an elaborate, beautiful place, sumptuous place. But that was the place that God chose to dwell, okay? And again, a foreshadowing of God's whole purpose, his redemptive purpose, is that he was going to indwell Christ, and Christ's glory was much greater than the glory of the temple, as glorious as the temple was. Okay, chapter 7.
Jesus is in the details.
That's exactly right. They say sometimes that the devil is in the details.
But it's
No,
Jesus.
God is in the details.
That's right.
That's right. He's
All
always in
those
the details.
cubits and,
Yeah.
So I know I'm being here, but did you kind of
But
I know
it's
cool. The reason why the palace was almost twice, if not 3 times larger than the temple?
No, that's what we're going to get into today in chapter 7. In fact, why don't you start reading there for us? Chapter 7, verse 1.
Chapter 7.
Yeah, before you start off, we had our basic discussion of the temple and how it was built, and chapter 6 leaves off that it took 7 years to build the temple, and it was built, as we discussed last time, in complete, total silence. And so now, what's that?
I thought it was 11 years.
It started in the 4th year of his reign, and it was finished in the 11th year of his reign, perhaps, but it took 7 years to build.
Well, I thought we said it was 966 BC when it was started, and I have 955 BC when it was complete.
I don't know.
So
Well,
I
in verse-
don't know.
In verse 38, last sentence says he spent 7 years building it.
Get this straight.
Maybe gathering all the stuff.
Yeah. See, that timeline up there is 40 years off, so if we're 4 years off here, that's still close enough for government work, I think.
I'll
So,
have to research it.
7 years in building.
Well, it says in the 4th year, the foundation of the house was laid, and then he spent 7 years building it,
Yeah.
so 7 and 4.
So that's right, it was 11 years into his reign that it was completed. So, all right, go ahead, chapter 7.
Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished his entire house. He built the house of the forest of the Lebanon 100 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, built on 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on the pillars. It was roofed with cedar on the 45 rafters, 15 in each row, which were on the pillars. There were window frames in the 3 rows, facing each other in the 3 rows. All the doorways and doorposts had 4-sided frames opposite, facing each other in the 3 rows. He made the hall pillars 50 cubits long and 30 cubits wide. There was a porch in front with pillars and a canopy in front of them. He made the hall of the throne where he was to pronounce judgment, the hall of justice, covered with cedar from floor to floor. His own house where he would reside in the other court back of the hall was of the same construction. Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken in marriage. All these were made of costly stones cut according to measure, sawed with saws, back and front, from the foundation to the coping, and from outside to the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, huge stones, stones of 8 and 10 cubits. There were costly stones above, cut to measure, and cedar wood. The great court had 3 courses of dressed stone to 1 layer of cedar beams all around. So had the inner court of the house of the Lord and the vestibule of the house.
All right, pause right there. Now we're going to get back into the temple. But Nancy's question in the beginning was a very good one. Why do we have this insertion of the account of Solomon's palace stuck in here at this point in time? And it took almost twice as long to build, and it's considerably larger. The temple, it says back in chapter 6, verse 2, it says it was 60 cubits long and it was 20 cubits wide. Okay, Solomon's house is 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide. So quite a bit bigger. What does that tell you?
He had to have a place for those 700 wives.
Yeah. And don't forget the 300 concubines. Yeah.
300 concubines.
Plus, David had spent time gathering the materials for the temple and doing the plans and some of those preliminary things.
Mm-hmm.
And Solomon had to do all of it from scratch for his palace.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. But what else does this tell us about Solomon? The fact that he would build his house almost twice as big as the temple and take twice as long.
He was stuck on himself.
I think that's
Yeah,
right.
a little prideful.
I think this is one of the manifestations of, and one of the foundation points, if you will, of Solomon's downfall. God had given him tremendous gifts, given him this tremendous gift of wisdom. But what we're going to see later on, in fact, before we leave, before we get Solomon buried, we're going to spend a little time, I think, talking about Ecclesiastes and where he went wrong. And we're going to read in Ecclesiastes where Solomon says that I did all this stuff for myself. And so we see that did Solomon do great things for the Lord? Yes, he did. He was, he was dedicated to the Lord, but he also wound up doing a lot of stuff for himself too. He spent, at the end of his days, he spent more time living, as the preacher would put it in Ecclesiastes, he spent living under the sun, right? Rather than trying to remain in the path that God wanted him to follow.
If he was so wise, why didn't he know better?
That's a good question, and I think that's...
Knowing and doing are 2 different things. You can know what's right and not be willing to do it.
Yourself gets in the way.
Yes.
Well, and that's a struggle that all human beings, from the beginning of time have had. Solomon was given this tremendous gift of wisdom, greater wisdom than anybody had ever had before, and greater wisdom than anyone would have following him. But we're going to see that Solomon misapplied his wisdom, that God intended for him to use that wisdom to follow God's plan and to search out what God wanted him to do and to devote his life to doing God's will and using that wisdom to build God's kingdom. But instead, what did he do? He took that wisdom and he used it for fleshly pursuits. Now, if he had used that wisdom the right way for godly pursuits, for spiritual pursuits, it would have resulted in a different outcome. But he used all that wisdom to pursue his fleshly desires. And we're going to see that as a result of that, what happened, how was his life at the end? He was in absolute misery.
Yeah.
Miserable.
He was absolutely miserable despite all that wisdom. Because why? He used it in the wrong way.
You think it doesn't say that I know of, could it have been somebody around him, people he had around him that would kind of that since she's so smart, let's do this or something, use it.
It could have been, but I think, I don't know that Solomon was greatly influenced by anybody except himself and his own flesh. I think it was his own flesh that led him astray. I really believe
Or
that.
the wives.
The one I was at him.
Well, I mean, he chose the wife. The wife didn't choose him.
But they had him worshiping.
Yeah,
They worship their gods.
Their God.
that's right. He knew better than that, but he built, he allowed them to build, monuments to their foreign gods, to the deities of these foreign countries. And I don't know that he ever worshiped them himself, but he allowed the worship to take place. So in essence, he sanctioned it. And that was an abomination before God. And as a result of what he did, despite all of his wealth, despite all of his wisdom, despite him having everything that his heart desired, what did it bring him? Absolute, total misery. That's where he was.
When did he write Ecclesiastes? In the end of his
I think
time?
very late in his life. Because he talks about it at the very end, growing old, about how his eyes getting dim and how he's getting weak and how his teeth are falling out. So I think he was very close to the end of his life, and so he's trying to pass on what he'd learned about it. I think the Holy Spirit inspired him to write about the miseries that he experienced as a result of taking God's gifts and devoting them to fleshly pursuits as opposed to godly pursuits. A warning to all of us.
Did you tell us within the last 2 weeks that Solomon only was 60 years old when he died?
Yep. Only 60 years old, which is pretty young, by those standards.
Mm-hmm.
He came to the throne when he was a young man, probably about 19 or 20 years old, and he reigned for 40 years, so he only lived to be about 60.
Well, they just had again on Facebook about people that win the lottery, the big ones,
Yeah,
they end up hating it.
yeah, miserable.
Miserable.
Yeah, all that wealth that they thought they wanted, they get it, and all it brings them is misery. That can happen. All right. Anything else about Solomon's palace? All right, verse 13, chapter 7, verse 13. The other thing about, as we talked about last week, the temple, it was a beautiful place. It was made of gold. It was filled with gold, filled with silver, filled with all sorts of treasures. The temple, again, the Solomon's palace, again, was a beautiful place. But one of the things that Solomon's palace did, it also attracted the attention of foreigners from the outside and basically painted a big bullseye of a target right on Jerusalem. And once God took his protection away because the people turned their back on him, the foreign invaders started coming. Why? Because they wanted all that wealth. They saw the wealth and they wanted it. All right. Chapter 7, verse 13. Johnny, you want to read or pass? Terry, you want to pick up at verse 13?
King Solomon sent to Tyre and brought Huram, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and whose father was a man. Tyre was a craftsman in bronze. Huram was highly skilled and experienced in all kinds of bronze work. He came to Solomon and did all the work assigned to him.
All right, pause just a second. We read about a king. These two names are sometimes interchanged and confused. One was Hiram and one was Huram. Sometimes they reverse them. There was a King Hiram, who was from Tyre. But this is a different guy. This isn't the king, because we see here that he was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali. So he was a Jew, this particular guy. He had the same name, or a name that was very similar to the king of Tyre. But anyway, he was well skilled and he does a lot of this work. What did you say, Wanda?
It says his father was from Tyre, so he could have been somewhat related to that, but he was also half Jewish.
Yeah.
Yeah, one was from the tribe of Dan and one from the tribe of Naphtali.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, verse 15, read on.
He cast 2 bronze pillows, each 18 cubits high and 12 cubits around, by line.
All right, pause right there. All right, it's 18 cubits high, which is how tall was it?
27?
27 feet tall. And it's made out of bronze, and it says, and its circumference was 12 cubits, which means its diameter was what?
18 feet.
Round.
All right, 18 feet in circumference, but what was its diameter? Do you math. Divide 12 by pi.
Somebody else can do the math.
So it's about,
7.5
12 divided by 3 is about 4
7.5
cubits, so it'll be about 6 feet in diameter roughly.
My notes say 7.5.
What type of pi do you have there? 3.14159, how far out are you?
It's in there.
Inches would take. Well, it would be.
It's a footnote.
Okay. It would be 18, let's see, 12 cubits measured from circumference, so it would be 12 cubits divided by pi would be the diameter, so roughly, again, about 4 cubits, 6 to 7
2.3
feet.
meters.
I don't do meters.
It's a
It's right here.
Verse 16.
I don't do meters either.
Me either. It's in it.
That's a communist measurement.
7.5
8 meters is about 26 feet. Is that what you're
There
asking?
you go. Yeah. All right, verse 16.
He also made 2 capitals of test bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. Each capital was 5 cubits high. A network of interwoven chains festooned the capitals on top of the pillars, 7 for each capital. He made pomegranates in 2 rows encircling each network to decorate the capitals on top of the pillars. He did the same for each capital. The capital on top of the pillar and the portico were in the shape of lilies, 4 cubits high. On the capitals of both pillars, above the bowl-shaped part next to the network, were the 200 pomegranates in rows all around. He erected the pillars at the portico of the temple. The pillar of the south he named Jachin, and the one of the north Boaz. The capitals were on top were in the shape of lilies, and so the work on the pillars was completed.
Okay, so we have these 2 giant pillars standing outside of the temple. They were so significant that they were given names. One was Jachin, meaning what?
He establishes.
And the other Boaz, meaning what?
In him is strength.
Okay, so in his strength, and it will be established. So we have these 2 pillars that are 27 feet tall, and then they have another capital on top of it, another about 7.5 feet. So they were pretty impressive, and they were all of cast bronze. What is the significance of those? I didn't, in my research, I didn't really find anything that answered the question, except if you look in Revelation chapter 3, verse 12, Jesus talking to the church in Sardis, he says, "He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it anymore. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name." So he says, "He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple." So I think what these 2 pillars represent is those who overcome. In other words, those who overcome the obstacles, who have the pure faith in Christ. They will be like the pillar in the temple, which you looked at these things, you say, these were some impressive pillars, cast bronze, 27 plus 7, 35 feet tall, big old pillars. And he says, and they will remain in the temple and they will not be moved. So that's the way Jesus looks at those who believe in him, pillars in his temple. Yes, sir?
You read in there also, in my new name. What was his new name?
In 3:12? Let me read that again.
Also, what's the significance of the chains? Because he put those in the temple also.
Yeah, I don't think I got an answer to that. "He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it anymore, and I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name."
So what's my new name?
That's a good question.
It's not capitalized, because it made you, I was thinking maybe it was his name that's written on your heart. But it's not capital, well, that doesn't mean anything.
I don't know.
Because I don't think it's the person's new name, I think it's Christ.
Christ.
That's Christ's name, but I don't remember him
Might
anywhere
have to
else, so
wait.
he's gonna have a new
Might
name.
have to wait till you get to
We have to
heaven.
wait,
Might have
right?
to wait.
Yeah, I thought about that too, see, but that's the first time I heard that.
Yeah.
Lilies.
Well, we've read that before, it just never clicked. That was a good
Yeah,
question.
yeah, I read,
we'll have to dwell on that.
Sometimes you go through sentences and you just read them and you're looking for certain things and you forget the others, but I was paying attention to the other.
Yeah. All right. You've asked a good question. We'll find an answer to that, maybe. At some point we will. All right, verse 23.
What's the significance of the pomegranates? I can't find anything in my notes on that.
A long time ago, that was said for fertility.
Yeah,
Pomegranates, fertility?
yeah. They were, yeah.
Now, that's man, that's, you
No, that
know,
was mango.
I thought it was something else.
No, yeah. Pomegranates, I think, symbolize fertility and growth and
With all the
prosperity,
seeds.
so.
Yeah, but the only thing I
Maybe
have
seeds.
cherubim symbolizing divine protection, open flowers and palm trees for fertility.
Yeah.
If he had access to 1,000 women, how many kids did he have?
Not many.
Run some DNA tests with you.
too many to
What about
count.
that too?
All right, we'll talk about that more later.
Oh, come on.
That's with all the pomegranates.
All right, verse 23. Yeah, he needed his pomegranate. Verse 23.
No wonder he only lived to 60, right?
All the same thing. He wore himself out.
Oh,
Well, you know, in I don't know if you ever watched documentaries, but American Bison, the bull that has his little harem or whatever,
Mhm.
and by the time he fights all the other bulls and takes care of all the females, at the end, he dies.
Yeah. Let that be a lesson to us.
Yeah.
All right, verse 23, Warren, read on.
All right, he made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high.
All right, what is this he's talking about?
A
The
big
most
sea.
sea was representing the primeval, I have a note, primeval watery chaos subdued by the Lord, creator of the world.
It was a big tank used for the pre-ceremonial washing.
Right, it's the equivalent of this, okay, in the tabernacle. Remember, we had the altar of sacrifice, and then we had the brazen laver here, okay? This is kind of the layout. The temple itself is more elaborate, but it has many of the same elements, except we're gonna see this, the altar of sacrifice here was not very big. It was, I wanna say it was just maybe a couple of cubits. The brazen laver here for washing was, about the same size, not that big. But this one is called the sea here.
Because it's so
And again,
big.
it's called the sea. It represents, and what is it used for? It's used for cleansing, but it also, remember we said before that the layout of the tabernacle was sort of a map of where the children of Israel had been, remember? And in this context, the brazen laver represented the Red Sea. This is the Passover, the passing through the Red Sea, and then into the wilderness. So this is, it's called the sea, but it's interesting that interesting that it's called the sea because it does represent, in a sense, the Red Sea, the crossing of the Red Sea. But it's also a cleansing vessel, and it's pretty big. How big does it say it is?
It would have blood in it.
10 cubits from brim to brim, so it was 15 feet wide. It was a pretty big old bowl there.
Maybe it had a drain at the bottom.
I don't know if it had a drain at the bottom. Can you imagine having to clean that thing?
That's what I was thinking.
Oh, ladies, can you imagine?
I mean, that stinky
Well, and
blood.
don't you know, it's gonna
like
be
Clover
red
Clean.
in color with all the blood in
Yeah.
it, so it's gonna look like a Red Sea.
It absolutely would. That's a good point,
And
too,
is
the Red
that-
Sea.
And
Yeah.
is that how the Red Sea got its name? I mean, was it named that, God in his province named it that because they would go through it and then with the blood?
Could be, I never thought about that.
Well, the Red Sea was full of blood because of the Egyptians. Well,
Yeah.
the Egyptians died there, but, I mean, they
You think
drowned.
Yeah, they weren't.
I read somewhere that it's interesting, we talk about what was going on here. We're gonna talk about this huge sea that held a lot of water. And there's 10 other bowls that held a lot of water. And there was a lot of sacrifice. Thousands of animals were sacrificed up on that Temple Mount. I read somewhere that some excavations were made of the Temple Mount. I wish I could find that. but it said that within the Temple Mount, they found there was an elaborate system of drains built into it,
Well, it'd
which you
have
can
to be.
imagine they would need, you know?
Oh, yes.
Number one, for draining all the blood out, but then you bring the water in, and then you wash all the stuff out, you know, to take the blood down. And it, of course, drained down into the Kidron Valley, down to the east, and of course, away from the Gihon Spring. But you think that without those drains built in, that infrastructure, if you will, that would have been one swampy mess around there.
It'd been deep.
But you know all
That
their,
was it.
And
Yes.
you're right.
and you know all their regulations that they have to clean and purify? They
Yeah.
can't be touching this stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
And dead
That's why
animals.
those Gibeonites were doing it.
Those Gibeonites, yeah, don't underestimate what they were doing. They were
Yeah.
hauling a lot of water. They were hauling a lot of wood. Yeah, that was their job. Yeah. All right, read on.
It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it. Below the rim, gourds encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The gourds were cast in 2 rows and 1 piece with the sea. The sea stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were toward the center.
Okay, pause right there. Just visualize that. So you had these bulls, these giant bulls. They were like 3 facing, you know, east, north, west, and south, with their tails together, and then this giant bull was on top of it.
There's 12 of them for the tribes,
Yep. Yep.
from each tribe.
12 tribes, and of course the oxen representing strength. Right. Okay, read on.
It was the handbreadth in thickness, and its rim was like the rim of a cup, like a lily blossom. It held 2,000 baths.
Who's got a translation of how much water was 2,000 baths?
12,000 gallons of water.
I have a bath
Ooh.
equals about 6 gallons.
Yeah, so about 12,000 gallons of water. That was
Yeah,
big
it was
old thing.
11,500 gallons.
So it says it was the metal from which it was cast was a handbreadth thick. So that's how thick the metal was of the sea. That was a pretty big piece of metal. And the top of it turned over like a cup. Okay, so it was shaped in a pleasant fashion. Okay.
It says about 3 inches for the hand breadth. It
Yeah.
was 3 inches thick.
That's still a big old piece of
So how
metal.
much did this thing weigh?
A bunch.
Well, and it had to hold all that water.
The weight of the water, yeah.
Yeah.
And then all that's on top of the bulls?
Yeah.
Yeah, the bulls are holding all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the bulls represented divine strength.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, read on.
He also made 10 movable stands of bronze, each was 4 cubits long, 4 wide and 3 high.
So you got these stands he's talking about here. They're 6 feet long and 6 feet wide, and these stands, Warren's going to describe, they have 4 wheels on them, and there's going to be a bowl in each one of these stands. So read on.
This is how the stands were made. They had side panels attached to uprights. On the panels between the uprights were lions, bulls, and cherubim, and on the uprights as well. Above and below, the lions and the bulls were wreaths of hammered work.
Pause right there. Lions, bulls, and cherubim representing what? The lion being what? Kingly.
Lion of Judah?
Kingly, Jesus is the lion of Judah. The bull representing God's strength, and the
I
cherubim,
don't have,
divine.
I have cherubim, lions, and palm trees.
Wow.
That's a misprint.
What verse?
I've got angel.
29.
Oh,
Yeah,
29.
Cherubim.
Cherubim.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oxen and-
We got
Go
palm
ahead,
trees
go
somewhere
ahead.
else. Read on.
Yeah, palm trees are somewhere else.
All right, let's see where.
About 30, I think.
30, yeah. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels and bronze axles, and each had a basin resting in 4 supports, cast with wreaths on each side. On the inside of the stand there was an opening that had circular frame 1 cubit deep. This opening was round with its base work. It measured 1.5 cubits. Around its opening there was an engraving. The panels of the stands were square, not round. The 4 wheels were under the panels, and the axles were attached to the stand. The diameter of each wheel was 1.5 cubits. The wheels were made like the chariot wheels. The axles, rims, spokes, and hubs were all of cast metal. Each stand had 4 handles, one on each corner, projecting from the stand. At the top of the stand, there was a circular band half a cubic deep. The supports and panels were attached to the top of the stand. Each engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees on the surfaces of the supports and on the panels in every available space.
All right, so there you go. You got the cherubim, you got the lions and palm trees on the plates and the stays on the borders. Okay, read on.
With wreaths all around. This is the way he made the 10 stands. They were all cast in the same molds and were identical in size and shape. He then made 10 bronze bases, each holding 40 baths and measuring 4 cubits across, 1 basin to go on each of the 10 stands. He placed 5 of the stands on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north. He placed a sea on the south side at the southeast corner of the temple. He also made the basins and shovels and sprinkling bowls. So Hiram finished all the work he had undertaken for King Solomon in the temple of the Lord. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 2 sets of network decorating the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 sets of network, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network, decorating the bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars. The 10 stands with their 10 basins, the sea and the 12 bowls under it, the pots, shovels, and sprinkling bowls. All these objects that Hiram made for King Solomon for the temple of the Lord were burnished with bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the plain of the Jordan between Sekar and Zarethan.
Pause right there. That's interesting. It says evidently there's a place along the Jordan River that had a lot of clay, which should have been good for casting. You take the clay, you make the mold, and you bake it, and then you pour your metal into it. But that's a long way to haul all that bronze or that.
Yeah.
Did I miss it? What are the shovels for? Why do we have shovels?
I think probably for cleaning up the mess around there from all the sacrifice. I think they were cleaning implements myself. All right, read on, verse 48.
Ooh, 48?
Yeah.
47.
47.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so, 47. Solomon left all these things unweighed because there were so many. The weight of bronze was not determined.
Pause right there. Now, it's interesting that this would be written there. It says, all these things were made, but there was no weight given for the bronze. It is said by some that's symbolic, that's representative, that all this bronze was used as implements of service for the temple. Okay, the shovels, the pails, the cleaning vessels. And so the idea was that the bronze would represent what symbolically?
The waste or the leftover?
No. They were for cleaning up, in other words, for doing the work to service the temple. So all these bronze implements would be the servants of God. Those who would serve the temple. And the idea that is conveyed here by saying that all this bronze was unweighed was that there would be no limit to those who could serve God, who could be a part of his kingdom, if you will, his servants. Okay. All right, read on, verse 48.
Solomon also made all the furnishings that were in the Lord's temple. The golden altar, the golden table on which was bread of the presence, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the right and 5 on the left, in front of the inner sanctuary, the gold floral work and lamps and tongs, the pure gold basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes and censers, and the gold sockets for the doors of the innermost room, the most holy place, and also for the doors of the main hall of the temple. When all of the work King Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought in the things his father David had dedicated, the silver and gold and the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasury of the Lord's temple.
All right, pause right there just a second. There's something very interesting about what we've read so far. All right, we all remember what the layout of the tabernacle was, right? We know that there was the bronze altar, the brazen laver for washing. When you get inside, you had the lampstand, which is on the left, right? You had the table of showbread, which is on the right, and directly in front of you was the altar of incense. Then you had the veil, and then behind that was the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was with the mercy seat on top of it. Now, what we've learned here is in the temple, it's different. There's only one altar of sacrifice, and it's huge. And interestingly, the dimensions of the altar of sacrifice, if my math is correct, are the same direct dimensions as the Holy of Holies. Check that out, which I think there's something interesting about that. Then there is this huge bronze laver. It's called the seat. But in addition to that, there were what? There were 10 more bowls made.
10 each, yeah.
Okay. And then we just learned here
That could be moved.
how many lampstands were there?
10?
There were 10 lampstands made. If you look over to the parallel verses in Chronicles, where it talks about the implements, it also says that there were 10 tables of showbread made. Yeah. So my question is, why? And then it's for the altar of incense. There was only one of those, okay, that was made. But then of course in the Holy of Holies we have the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat back there with the newly built cherubim. But the interesting thing, and the question I have, why were there 10 basins in addition? And see, the thing I don't know, I think that out here you had the one big and you had the 10 around it, and it said that Hiram made 10 more lampstands and he made 10 more tables of showbread. And when he talks about the lampstand, he said 5 on each side. And I'm wondering if, and it doesn't say specifically, I wonder if the original lampstand from the tabernacle was there with 5 new ones on each side, 5 to the left and 5 to the right, same way with the table of showbread, because it said that Hiram made 10 in his time frame. Did they have the original and then 5 on one side and 5 on the other side? But the question is, why do we go from 1 in the tabernacle to 10 in the temple?
Well, actually, it'd be 11.
Could be
Then
11.
why 10 as opposed to 12?
Yeah. What do you think?
Is it 10 when they go
Population
from the
has
other
something to
one?
do
In the
with
south, and they separated and had the two to the north and 10 to the
more
south.
priests, more people.
Those are all potentially good answers. I was trying to see if these are depicted up here. It says that the altar of sacrifice was to the south and to the east. I think this may be, well, no, I don't think we can see it here. I don't think any of those implements are there. Of course, some of them have been on the inside. I don't know that there's an answer. Why is it tenfold? I think that perhaps what we're seeing is we see a progression from the tabernacle to the temple, both of which were to be what? The place where God's presence would be manifested. So they're very similar, the tabernacle and the temple. But we see that the temple is much more elaborate, right? It's much more ornate.
Well, it's permanent.
Yeah, and it's also permanent. Well, as permanent as anything on earth could be, right? But we also see that some of the things were increased at least tenfold.
But it's a representation of what's in heaven.
Yeah. And part of that is a progression, as to say, the progression from the tabernacle to the temple. There's going to be another progression from the temple to heaven, which is going to be at least 10 times greater than that or more. And so I think the idea is that we have a progression from humble to magnificent to just unbelievable in heaven. But the tenfold could also represent the multiplication of blessings. But if you have that, for example, the tenfold, the laver represents what? The washing or the cleansing. So, okay, when Christ comes, a tenfold cleansing comes out of that. The light, the golden lampstand represented what? Jesus is the light of the world. And with tenfold, it says that his light is made 10 times brighter. In the same way, the table of showbread represented what?
Bread of life.
Jesus is the bread of life. Again, magnified, to abundance. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. But it's interesting that we only have one altar of sacrifice and not a multiplication of those. And what's the significance of that?
Christ was.
Christ
That's right, he was the one, his sacrifice on the cross
One time.
was enough. That's
One
right.
time, one person, one time.
Yeah.
That's all that was needed.
And then there's only one altar of incense representing what? Anybody remember what the altar of incense represented?
It's the aroma
Smell
of our
good.
prayers.
Right.
Smell
But
good when
let me remind you, the inner part of the tabernacle was intended to remind people of what they experienced in the wilderness, right? And so they experienced the bread, which is, what did they experience in the wilderness?
Manna.
Manna from
Manna.
heaven. The golden lampstand was what? Light. God's guiding light, He guided them through. And then the altar of incense was intended to remind them of what?
To worship.
To worship, but what in particular?
Mount Sinai,
Mount Sinai, there you go. And what happened at Mount Sinai?
the Ten Commandments, the law was given.
The law was given, which was an integral part of the covenant.
Right.
And so I think the whole idea of the altar of incense was to remind them of Mount Sinai and what happened there. The law was given and the law was a part of the covenant, okay? And then as you said, the beautiful thing about this is that the altar of incense, it had this smoke that was coming up, this beautiful perfume, which is said to be the intercession of Christ. And that's so New Testament because one of the great benefits that Christ brought to us is His intercession did what? Fulfilled all the requirements of the law for us so that we might receive the blessings. And His intercession also was His sacrifice, His shed blood. He became the curse that we would not experience the curses of the broken law, which we deserve. So, again, a reminder, but there's only one of those. Why?
Christ.
Because He did it all.
Oh, wait a minute, I got one more question. In
Wait, didn't
Revelation,
you just call time?
yeah, but in
We're
Revelation,
over, this is first overtime.
in Revelation, it speaks of the fragrance aroma that God smells, and then and He references it to our prayers.
Uh-huh.
So, and our prayers are being interceded by Christ, so that's where you're getting that, right?
That's right.
Okay.
It's all part of it, yep. Okay, second overtime?